Love you, Richard. My name's Richard, an alcoholic.
Hey, Richard.
And I tell you what, it's good to see a bunch of people in the room of Alcoholics Anonymous. I tell you, I've missed that. I've missed full houses. I've missed drunks over the time. I'm supposed to thank you, Ruth, for the opportunity, and it's an honor and a privilege to be able to do anything for Alcoholics Anonymous today. My sobriety date is June 16th of 2003, and I'm sober but for the grace of God. I've got a sponsor. Sponsor's got a sponsor, and I have the honor and privilege to be a sponsor myself and to be a sponsee because it saves my life. Left to my own devices, I'll run down a road I usually or shouldn't. I make decisions based on self. Let's see, I'm supposed to tell you what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today. I try not to script, and there's no telling what's going to come out of my mouth. But the reality of it is I was born here in Pinehurst, and I was born Breach, so I came out showing my ass, and it never stopped, really. And even coming into Alcoholics Anonymous, as a newcomer, I remember when, I had highlights in my hair, I had all kinds of earrings. Yeah, oh yeah, I've been around that long. And I never will forget, I'd walk around up in here, and this old timer sitting in the back, he said, "You can sit down now, Richard. We all seen you." And I went, "What?" But the reality of it is that I'm grateful to be. I'm a grateful, recovered alcoholic. Growing up, I grew up in Pine Bluff, right down the street here, and my house was a party house. I used to go to sleep at night with Bob Dylan blaring out of two big old 15-inch JBLs, my dad playing a harmonica, another guy playing a mandolin, and that's the way I'd go to sleep. So there was always drinking, there was always something else going on, but it was a good life. I never did good in school. One of my first memories. I don't remember much of my childhood. I remember just bits and pieces of it. I had an aunt traumatized me. She poured ketchup all over her. She was babysitting me. She poured ketchup all over her, come running in the house screaming that she got hit by a car. And as a little kid, that traumatized me. And through the amends process, I got to share the fact that, I had a resentment for her. And she had the opportunity to make amends to me for scaring me as a little kid. One of my first memories that I do remember is following these little painted lines on the ceiling. And we were at the hospital. And I didn't know what those little lines were, and they were pushing my dad in a wheelbarrow. In a wheelbarrow. It could have been. It was a wheelchair. And, they were pushing me in a wheelchair. And we're following these little painted lines on the ceiling, and I thought that was really cool because, it's sort of like a maze, You're going to find the exit or find the treasure at the end of it. And we follow these things, and then we come to this room, and they're talking to my dad, and they're checking him in, and my mom, I don't know how old I was, but I remember my mom, she's a short lady, and she looked at me and she said, "Richard, you can't drink. Because if you do, this is what's going to happen to you." The reality of it was that we were checking my dad into detox. And, sort of like what our big book says, that ominous warning that I failed to heed. I didn't know anything about that. And I went, huh, okay. My dad, growing up in an alcoholic home, my dad, he came to Alcoholics Anonymous. He had alcoholics come to the house that were trying to get sober. I don't think any of them stayed sober. He didn't stay sober. He stayed sober. He made it 7 years and had a mental relapse and never stayed sober again. But growing up, I was my dad's little bartender. If he was watching a basketball game, sports, race, or whatever, it was, you go get me a beer out of the refrigerator. And my reward for doing that was I got the first swallow. And I remember saying, do I get the first swallow? Like bargaining with him. And I love the taste of alcohol. I mean, if I could drink today and get away with it, I would. I love alcohol. I love what it does to me. And I know today that I drank essentially for the effect produced by alcohol. And eventually my dad had to say, nah, I'll go get my own beer, because I would drink half of it before giving it back to him. I said, nah, this ain't going to work. And it was pretty cool that my dad was, drank, and he drank by the case, or he would have a gallon of Gallio, I think that's how you pronounce it, in the refrigerator. But he'd have a case, and I could always steal beer, take them back to my bedroom, and make sure I tilted it and slid all the beer forward so he wouldn't know that beers were gone. And so a lot of people can say they remember the first drink. I don't. I always remember drinking. There's a picture of me sitting in my dad's lap holding a 16-ounce Budweiser. I used to be so proud of that thing. And I guess today I'm grateful because I found myself in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Fast forwarding a little bit, I was a class clown. I was always cutting up. And I qualify for about any 12-step program you got. I have that personality that if one's good, so let's just see what one more do. And I can never say, okay, I'm good, because the next one's going to make it better. And by the time I got to where I thought I should be, I'd already put so much in me, I was way over the cliff. Let's see. Middle school, I got suspended in the 7th or 8th grade for being drunk. There was this girl that liked me, and this guy said, man, I'll give you 2 fists of liquor if you give me a chance to go out with her. And I said, sure. And he paid off. He paid up. And when he did, I didn't make it to lunch before I was headbutting chalkboards and cussing teachers and all that stuff. So my main, everybody else would go to parties and they'd be saying, ooh, it wasn't about the girls. Me, it was all about who's got the alcohol, who's got what I need, and how can I get as messed up as I need to get messed up. And that started back in 7th, 8th grade. Get into high school, I was a social chameleon. If you were doing what I wanted to do, then I was there. That's where I met my first wife. She was older than I was, so she could buy cigarettes, and she had a car and 2 jobs, and I could sit at home and she'd buy me cigarettes and, take care of me. And, fast forward. I used to live right up the street here with that first wife, and I used to ride by here. My dad brought me to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. when I forget how old I was. Probably after I got suspended, 7th or 8th grade. And but I used to ride by here because I knew what it was, and everybody would be standing outside with their coffee cups, the little styrofoam cups outside. And I'd ride by in my truck and give a beer can salute. And if I had only known what was within these walls, I wish I'd have came here sooner. But let's see. I've got these things I called a series of unfortunate events that brought me to the ruins of Alcoholics Anonymous. That first wife had left. And she said, "Richard, you need to go get help." I remember quitting drinking one time for a week. I said, "Look, I'm not an alcoholic. I quit for a week." And then I remember taking a drink and then drinking more and being conscious of, oh man, that was just a week. And that's what scares me today, is that I know there is a monster. There's a beast that I would awaken that would kill me. I'm grateful for the fact that I know that to the marrow of my bone, I'm an alcoholic. And I don't have to question that today. And I'm grateful for that fact. Because for a long time I just thought I was crazy. I need some meds. Something's wrong with me. My dad suffered from an outside issue. He was bipolar. So I thought, oh crap, here we go. And he'd stay up for days, then he'd crash, and he'd drink, and I'd see this vicious cycle. So it scared me. But after that first wife left, I went into a spiral. I just went down quick. And then probably the first thing that I know that there is a God today. I know that there is a higher power. And I believe that I've had a guardian angel watching over me my entire life. That first wife. The very first time I had a moment of clarity, I'd been up for a day or so, and I'd been over at a buddy's house playing poker. And then I came home to a house that had none but wedding pictures, and I'm there all by myself. There's wedding pictures on the wall, and she'd left, and all this stuff. She actually took the kitchen table. I came home and the kitchen table was gone. And my best frying pan. But like I said, I'd been up for a couple days, and I knew where she was. I saw her car, so I stopped by. It was a buddy of mine's house. And I went in there, and she was drunk. They were drunk. And they were in their room watching TV. And I came home. I drove, and I was a driver. I would fight you for my keys. I was one of those guys that you're not taking my keys. And I don't know why I'm so compelled to tell this, but I left because she was drunk, passed out. I went home, and I just got crazy, pacing around the house. And I went and I grabbed my gun. And I drove back to Pine Bluff and pulled up in the driveway. Put my hand on the gun and went to step out of the truck. And this little voice said, "Richard, if you do this, I can't help you." It gives me goosebumps because that's the first time that I had heard an audible voice. God. that said, if you do this, I can't help you. So I put one foot on the ground, one hand on the gun, and that voice came, and I stopped. I had that moment of sanity. And wrote her a note, left it on her car, and went home. From there, the only time, there was actually a time before that. This is the first time I ever smoked crack. This guy said, let's go back. And that same voice, the very first time I ever heard it, said, Richard, if you do this, I can't help you. So I believe that my higher powers had a plan for me this whole time. Because it said that to me more than once, Richard, if you do this, I can't help you. And I chose to listen. For whatever reason. I have no idea. I always knew there was a God. But it wasn't personal to me. I had no connection with him. He's spirit of the universe, watches over everything. But it wasn't personal to me until I started looking back at these series of events. The next thing that happened was, of course, I went to a doctor. I said, look, man, I need some help. I said, the walls are closing in on me. I'm having panic attacks, and I'm afraid I'll kill somebody. And so they gave me all kinds of prescriptions. And by the end of it, I'm having to give 14 of them to my mom because I know I'm gonna come up short, so I can just get through. And I lied to a psychiatrist, and so it just got worse and worse and worse. I went to watch a basketball game at the bar. I never was a bar guy because I could never make it in there most of the time because I'd be too drunk. You ever been to the bar and seen the guy sitting on the front steps like this? That was me. I've been kicked off of most of the fishing piers on the east coast of North Carolina just because I was a liability to even walk out on them. And you never saw me mildly intoxicated. I was always drunk and always driving. I remember driving and from here to the beach and going to get out of the car and just fall out. They had to pick me up and carry me in. Well, I went to go watch this basketball game, and they didn't have it on. And if I ever went to the bar, I always ordered a double, straight, with a water chaser, because I drink for the effect. I like what it does for me. And next thing you know, I'm in a blackout, and I'm coming in and out. And what happens is they told me I couldn't lay my head on the bar. So you can't stay here unless you can keep your head off the bar. And I said, okay, I'm going to fix that. So I went to go stand up, and I was trying to lean up against the wall. But I kept falling down. And I did this numerous times. Come find out, I kept trying to lean up against the kitchen door. So I would go to lean against the wall and fall into the kitchen. They gave me it was a free taxi ride home, and so I caught that. And I had to call around and say, hey, man, where's my truck? Because I couldn't remember where I'd parked it. There are numerous times when I'd pull up I'd wake up in my truck at home and go, ooh, and get out and walk around because I never remember driving home. That was the first wake-up call. Where's my truck? Then the next thing that happened was I'd been visiting a buddy of mine up in Asheboro. I'd been up for a couple of days, and we'd been drinking some wild turkey and tequila. And I said something about his mama, jokingly. And he was kind of sensitive about it. I'd known him for a long time, but we under the influence. And what happened was the guy We were about to fight. I remember I stopped the truck in the middle of 220. Told him to get out. And he didn't. So we went back to his place, and I could tell tensions were getting worse and worse and worse. And I said, I need to leave here before something bad happens. What happened was I remember coming down 220, and my governor on my truck wouldn't go any faster. I just remember the sound of it going, run, run, cutting off at 95. I don't remember taking the exit, coming through Seven Lakes. I do remember getting home and telling the guys down here that they were going to go ride four-wheelers. I said, I'll meet you out there with my truck. It's the same truck my brother drives, so if you know my brother, that burgundy GMC, she'll run. And I broke her in right. But I went to meet these guys out in the woods, and I had a case of beer in the floorboard, a bunch of stuff in the ashtray, and I'm doing laps around this field out on the game lands. And I'd learned how to drive out there. It was right back behind my mom's house. And the next thing you know, I see blue lights, and I'm in the middle of the woods. And what in the world? And the thought came to me, do I stop or do I run? And unfortunately, that little voice, well, it does talk to me later, but it said run. And I said, okay. And so I'm driving on this dirt road at night, and just driving that thing. And I remember that trick about using your emergency brake and cutting off your headlights. And I used that thing, and it worked. I went, whooped it around at the edge of a field, and sure enough, here comes this cop. These blue lights, boom, and he goes airborne out into this field. And I go, aha, got it. And I start to take off. And then that same little voice said, Richard, if you do this, you're going to take it to a whole nother level. It said stop. And I said, okay. So I stopped. And I hope it was the first time, and I hope it's the last time I've ever had a gun pulled on me. Because come to find out, it was a game warden. And he comes sliding up. And I'm parked. And I get out of the truck. I ain't got no shoes on. I got blue jeans and no shirt. And he's pulled a gun on me, and the first thing out of my mouth is, I'm just a good old boy. I don't mean no harm. The Dukes of Hazzard growing up is one of my favorites. And I'm just a good old boy. I don't mean no harm. And he said, okay. But he handcuffed me, put me in the front seat, and I remember him wiping my foot. I remember I had sweat. And I said, can you please wipe my forehead? Because I was just sweating profusely. And he did. Then he sat down, and it was when they first got their breathalyzers. And he said, all right, I want you to blow into this thing. And I tried every little, blowing out the sides, blowing out my nose. He said, no, just blow in it. He said, I won't even write it down. And he lied, because he did write it down. But it was, I blew in that thing, and it was like .22. And I'm sitting there talking to him, and I had this amazing gift for talking myself out of trouble. Because by the end of that little scenario, he said, if you leave the truck here, I'll let you go home. He wrote me a ticket and all that jazz, and my sister-in-law came and picked me up. He said, if you come back out and get your truck, then I'm going to press charges and we're going to do the whole deal. So what happened was I went out there the next day to get my truck, and my rearview mirror on my truck was popped in, and it had bark on it. That little slick move where I used to cut off the headlights and emergency brake, there was a pine tree about this big that I'd clipped with that rearview mirror, that side mirror. So I truly believe that, I'm on borrowed time. I'm here for a reason. And the next thing that happened was wow. That story about me falling into the kitchen. The reality of it was, it's been a while since I've told my story. I said I went home. I didn't go home. I actually went to a buddy's house so I could try to find something to wake me up so that I could drink longer. And I didn't. What happened was I fell over in his bathroom and I broke his girlfriend's glasses. Then we started fighting in the front yard. And the cops showed up because I didn't pay that taxi that they got me. I'd lost my wallet in the taxi. And he'd called the law. And by the time the law got there, me and my buddy were out in the front yard fighting. And they put me in the police car. And I knew him. I'd went to high school with him. I said, Richard, calm down. And I kept headbutting the freaking window. And they said, Richard, if you do that one more time, we're going to hog tie you. And I did it one more time, and they hog tied me. Sprayed me with pepper spray, the whole deal. Threw me in the back seat on my belly. Next thing you know, I come out of a blackout. And I am riding in the front seat. And I asked the cop, where we're going. He says, we're going to Carthage. I said, oh, shit, I'm going to jail. And, all right. So we get up there, and it's the magistrate's office at about 11:45 on I think it was a Saturday night. And I'd heard this urban myth about being able to sign your own bail if you own property within the county that you're arrested. And I mentioned that to the magistrate, and he said, nah, I think we're going to keep you. We've heard about you. We're going to keep you for a little while. And I said, okay. And, I was always this passive-aggressive Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of thing, because what I saw was this little sticker at the bottom of the window, and it said bulletproof glass. And I thought it'd be wise to take my handcuffs and hit the window in front of the magistrate. So I do that, and I actually crack this window. And that's an expensive piece of window if you ever have to replace it. But he just jumps back and smiles a little bit. And then I turn around, and there's like these dudes. They're this tall. Sheriffs. All I see is chest. And it's like, whoa, I said, what are y'all doing in here? They said, you. Well, I get locked up. And all I can remember is this cinder block walls, a stainless steel toilet, I think, and a stainless steel bed. And I remember laying in there thinking to myself, you know what? Richard, this is your reality. This is the first of many trips to this place. And I was ready for the end. At this time, I drank my family away. I had drank all my friends away. They wouldn't even let me borrow $1. And I wanted to die. And I prayed to that God that had kept me alive up to that point. I said, God, just take the air from my lungs because I don't want to live anymore. If this is my reality, I'm done. And I started chanting like an Indian. Hey, and I remember the acoustics in that little room were just freaking awesome. I mean, gives me goosebumps. And I just remember going, wow. And I kept chanting, hey, and this sweet little bailiff, she come up and said, honey, are you okay? I said, yes, I'm talking to my ancestral brothers. Now, whatever that's about, I don't know. But she said, okay. And I went right back into chanting. And I had a spiritual experience. Just like what the big book talks about. I left from here. I remember looking at my hands going, wow, this is pretty cool. I remember looking at my feet and wiggling my toes and going, what in the world? And it'd be like staring out into the sky at night, seeing nothing but stars and staring into infinity. And I'm seeing that all around me. And then I got that feeling that something was watching me. So I turned around, and there was nothing there except stars and infinity. But I remember when I turned back around, I had a wave started at my head and just washed over me. And that same little voice said, Richard, it's going to be okay. And I'd never experienced that before in my life. I was always so full of anxiety. I never fit in. I was always worried about what you were thinking about me, what you were saying about me, because I know you're talking about me. And, not feeling good enough, all the insecurities, all the junk. But at that moment, it all washed away. And I had this feeling that everything is going to be okay. I woke up, and they put me in a general pop, and I recognized the guy there that I went to school with, and I said, look, man, I don't know what happened to me last night, but my life's going to be different. I stayed in there a couple days. And it just so happened that one of the guys that was in there was the secretary's son, and he called her and told her that I was in jail, and so I didn't. It just covered for me anyway, and she was a sweet lady, and I think of the world of her. But the reality of it is I didn't know what had happened to me. I went to treatment after that to keep my job. I wanted to make sure that I at least had that on the resume so I wouldn't lose my job. Went to treatment. I went to, I think it was Davidson Alcoholic Care at the time. I think now it's Path of Hope, maybe. I'm not sure. It's in Lexington. And I just remember it being an old farmhouse. And I remember writing in my journal, this is one step above jail. At least here I got to bring my pillow or some shit. But, but I don't remember the first couple years of my recovery. I remember being in that treatment center and we worked the first 5 steps. And then working the first 5 steps, I had another spiritual experience by working the 4th step. I'd written down all this garbage, that I'd never told a soul. And they gave me 4 guys to choose from, and I picked the oldest one, hoping he would die shortly thereafter. And but I said, why not? I'm out of town. Nobody knows me. Let's just dump it. And I'm so grateful that I did. After sharing with him and him sharing with me and me becoming more comfortable sharing these things, you couldn't have beat the smile off my face when I left out of there. I got out of there, and I think my first meeting back, I remember I didn't want to go. I got out of treatment, and I said, called around. At the time, that first ex-wife, her mom was, her grandma was black belt Al-Anon. I came home one day, and there was Alcoholics Anonymous book sitting in my shed, just out of nowhere, before I got divorced, and she put it there. But I called her to ask her about meetings, and she said there's one down here in the Aberdeen building every night of the week. I said, well, I just got out of treatment. I think I'm just going to relax. I'm just going to take it easy, tonight. She said, no, you need to go to a meeting tonight. And I've heard some percentages or something about people that go to a meeting as soon out of treatment as possible. But for me, I came down here, and that meeting was actually a individually twisted. That was the name of the meeting. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was actually a gay and lesbian meeting. And so my first friend, it was pretty cool. I mean, I just got to tell you that they welcomed me. And that's what I found in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, is that they welcomed me. And they kept welcoming me. And kept welcoming me. I'd like to say I stayed sober, but I didn't. I came to meetings, drank coffee, smoked cigarettes, and eyeballed women. And that was my... And I used to go home and tell my mom it's the best entertainment you could get for $1. To hear y'all talk about your stories and stuff just blew my mind. And I used to come in here and say I'm an alcoholic and an addict. And, I know today that for me, This is Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm speaking for myself, when I would share that I'm an alcoholic and an addict, sure, I am. But for me to share that in an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, it was my ego. It was my ego. I'm worse than you. And but the fact is that I'm grateful for good sponsorship. I'm grateful for the fact that I found a solution. I was shown a solution. What happened was I came back, and I'm going to meetings, and I did everything he told me not to do. I got in a relationship. I quit that job. I went to Treatment the Key. I moved. I quit reading the literature. I quit going to meetings. I quit praying. And the relationship went south. I said, okay. She didn't like me when I was sober. Let's see how she likes me when I'm drunk. And I proceeded to get drunk. Now this is God doing for me. I went to buy this 12-pack of beer, and it was Bud Light because I was trying to watch my figure. And she wouldn't take my ID. I had two forms. I had a motorcycle and a regular driver's license, but they were so messed up, scratched up, that you couldn't read them. And so my cousin had to vouch for me. And he did because he was a regular there. And so I got this 12-pack, and I remember going back to my house, or my aunt's house, and my little brother going, Richard, don't do it. Don't do it. And I said, he said, I'm going to call you sponsor. I said, I don't care. Call my sponsor. So what I've come to realize is that prior to the drink, I never thought about praying. I never thought about sponsor. I never thought about anything except relief. The only way I knew how to handle life. So I drank, and I remember feeling it hit my fingertips. Holy crap. And then I remember drinking, and then I only remember bits and pieces. But then I came to a place where it wouldn't get me drunk anymore. I sold a PlayStation so I could have enough gas money to get home, and I couldn't stay out of the mall. I couldn't stay. Everybody else is shopping, and I'm waiting for them to process. And I've got to go back out there and take a drink. Now I used to drink. I'd buy beer by the case and leave it room temperature, because nobody wanted to drink room temperature beer. So I didn't have to worry about people drinking my beer. And the joke was, and then it was always Bush. So the joke would be, who doesn't like a warm bush? But the reality of it is that that's when I experienced the phenomenon of craving. This I've got to have more. Because I would go out there, slam a beer, get halfway to the door and go, no, you ain't there yet. Then the most terrifying thing that I could experience as an alcoholic was that it didn't work. Holy crap. The anxiety, the fear, all that was still there. And it quit working. So I knew I had to get back up here, and what I did is I came back up here, and my sponsor that I had, that I'd wave at from across the room, and say, how you doing? I'm doing great. And what he did, I went up to him after the meeting after I'd picked up that white chip. I was sitting way back there. I remember walking all the way up here, picking up that white chip. God, it's a long walk. I mean, crickets. But he was still sitting up here smoking a cigar. And I said, look, man, whatever I had before, it didn't work. I've got to do something different. And he said, okay. And what he did is he got me in contact with a man that had working knowledge of that big book. About 6 of us got together in that kitchen right there. And we sat down at the table and we read. We opened up the big book. We read it. When it asked us to do something, we did it. And when it said pray, we prayed. When it said write, we wrote. When it said pause, we paused, whatever. But the reality of it is that I hadn't had to take a drink since. That sponsor of mine, and I've had several sponsors, what he did is he got me in contact with a guy that knew that book, and I'm so grateful for that. That guy actually became my sponsor after that sponsor moved away. Big Book George. And man, saved my life. Saved my life. So, George. He was a good guy. And he loved alcoholics. He loved alcoholics. But he, when I first asked him to be my sponsor, when I first got out of treatment, he said, I can't help you. He said, what? He said, yeah. He said, did you go to a treatment center? I said, yeah. He said, did you do drugs? I said, yeah. He said, well, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And I know today what his train of thought was is that he hadn't done those things. He'd gotten sober coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, and he'd never done drugs. He was a purebred alcoholic. So he knew that he couldn't share outside of his experience. But it's weird how God works, because he's actually the guy that took me through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's the way it works. I'm grateful for the people in my life, the guys that have given me the privilege to be a sponsor. What this fellowship has given me is it's given me a relationship with a higher power. It's given me a relationship with other people. It's given me a relationship with myself. I'm okay with Richard today. And for the most part, I'm okay with you. But we have to practice these principles in all our affairs. Doesn't say I ever hit it perfect. The only part in the big book that says I got to do something perfect, and it says, unless a man fails to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life, to work and self-sacrifice for others, then he's certainly not going to survive the trials and the certain trials and low spots that are coming ahead. This year it's been a rough year for me. Emotionally. It's probably been, but I know this, that my higher power has never left me. Y'all have always been here. And I'm grateful for that. I know today that I only stay sober one day at a time. It's the only thing I got to worry about. That tomorrow I can't do nothing about. Yesterday is done. This program, this Design for Living, gives me a way to clean stuff up. Because I mess up. It gives me a direction in life. Because I never knew how to live prior to this. Y'all taught me everything that's good in my life today. And I still, it's hard for me to talk to people, but it's getting better. You should have seen me when I first got here. It's real easy when I can sit up here and talk. But when you talk back, that's what messes me up. But, I got to tell you that I love Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's given me a life that I could not even dream of. I got married again. I got a 7-year-old boy that's never seen me drunk. Fixing to get divorced. I didn't have to take a drink. The reality of it is that I know today that I don't have to take another drink no matter what. If I continue to do what this program's taught me to do, it's a good sponsorship. And by trusting the God of my understanding and trying to practice these principles in all my affairs. Old timer used to say, trust God, clean house, help others. And I believe that to be true. I'm going to shut up. But I appreciate the opportunity to share my experience, strength, and hope. If you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, stick around. Get involved. And I was thinking, I remember filling out the paperwork to register this meeting as Keeping a Sober Group. And that's pretty neat, because I get to see a fellowship grow up around me. I get to have friends. It's a really, really neat thing. And I've never been able to experience it prior to these rooms. And I love you. I may not like you all the time, but I love you. And if no one's told you they love you today, I do. Thanks.